Well, I too am excited for Build, but we have one more week to talk about relationships, which we've been doing for most of February. If you don't know me, my name is Jason. I'm the Next Gen pastor here, and I'm excited to be wrapping up our conversation that we've been calling One, Two, We. As we talk about all relationships in all different sizes and all different versions that are spread throughout life. As a matter of fact, whether you're online, in VR, or in the room, I believe that you have people in your life. That's a safe bet. But here's what I know. Relationships are complicated. They take a lot of effort, and they take a lot of even mistakes and repair and healing. It all is part of it. And as I got ready for this week, I actually thought back to probably the most unique set of relationships I've ever had in my entire life. See, when I was 20, I was actually hired as a resident advisor in my dorm at college, which basically means at the wise age of 20, I was put in charge of 40 other teenage young adult men. It was a disaster waiting to happen. And as a matter of fact, over 2 years, a lot of disasters did totally happen. We had a Christmas tree lit on fire, not in protest, just in stupidity. We had floods that exploded. We had all the normal pranks and breakups and relationship problems. We had a snowfall out like this one that we piled up into a snow mound, and we dove out the second-story window into the snow, right? Essentially, you put 40 future youth pastors together, and this is what happens. And I was in control of none of it, but I was paid to be. And as I thought through those relationships, they were terribly interesting because this guy would have a problem with that guy or that person or that friend or that professor. It was complex, and it took a lot out of me. But I became known as an RA for kind of two things. One was completely on purpose, and the other one was a genuine accident. See, the one that was on purpose is I became known that I was very easy to bribe. Legit. If I caught you breaking the handbook for some reason with a fine attached, let's say your room was a problem, you snuck in after curfew, you had lights out, past lights on, past lights out, you snuck your girlfriend onto the floor. Like if I caught those things, I'd be like, hey, the handbook says $15. Or we can buy a pizza from down the road for $5 and share it. So that was completely on purpose. I wanted to be known as being easy to bribe. I like people, I want to champion people. I also am not a great bad cop. So that was on purpose. Right? The one that was on accident is I actually became known over 2 years for giving really good life advice, which doesn't make sense to me. Right? I mean, I was younger than some of these guys. But after graduation, what happened is like a bunch of them reached out through email or text or Facebook message, and they said, man, I just wanted to thank you for what you did for me. And I had no idea I was doing it. Right? And that's incredibly humbling that I impacted their future families and their ministries and all this stuff went right. It's also equally humbling there's probably the same amount of guys, if I had my physical address now, would send me their therapy bills for the exact same advice. But here's what's interesting. Every one of those guys, as they said thank you, they pointed to some relationship I had. Whether it was the way I treated my fiance, my friends, our enemies, teammates, professors, college admin, almost every one of them to a T said, you inspired me by the way you related or treated or connected with this person. See, here's my big idea for this morning is that, honestly, your relationships are always talking. Your relationships are saying something, and you're actually in control of what they say. And if I would have been known that the way I was treating people and the way I related with people was speaking to the guys I was leading, I would have been way more intentional about what I was saying. Right? I wouldn't have taken it to chance. I would have actually looked up God's advice instead of just my advice. Like, I would have sat back and I would have been more available to them. I would have actually paid attention to how I was treating people instead of just letting it happen on accident. And the same thing is true for your lives. Your lives and the relationships you keep are always talking to the people around you. We need to get a handle on what they're saying so we can make sure we leave a legacy that's worthwhile and not a legacy left on accident. All right, so my big idea for this morning is really this, that the work that God has done in your relationships, it wasn't ever meant to end with that relationship. This whole series has been working on the one between you and God, then taking that to the two and removing bitterness and rage and malice and unforgiveness between you and the other person around you, the two. But here's the truth. We do the one and the two so that we can impact the we, so that we can change the lives of the people around us. Because they're looking at your relationships. Your friendship with someone over here may actually teach someone way over here how to be a good friend. Your marriage that you're living out and doing your best with may actually inspire somebody else that marriage can be healthy again. The way you relate to your coworkers and your boss creates an environment around you that may be helpful or harmful to the people around you. See, our relationships are always speaking. So even if you're single, you're unmarried, divorced, with kids, without kids, with grandkids, without kids, with nephews, without, okay, you get it. There's something here for you to do. There's something to guide your relationships toward legacy and to make sure they're speaking out loud. See, in Deuteronomy, which is the 5th book of our Bible, Moses is actually rallying the people of Israel around before they enter the promised land. This massive land had been promised to them 40 years previously. And they had been wandering the desert waiting. And I get bored after 20 minutes. And they'd spent 40 years of their life just wandering around. And right before they're about to enter the promised land, to this place of identity and providence and blessing and protection, as they're about ready to enter into this land, Moses gathers the people around and actually reminds them of who they are. Most of the book of Deuteronomy is Moses talking to the people of Israel and reminding them that the things of the past don't have to go with them into the future. They can redefine what's happening around them. In Deuteronomy 6, we actually see this prayer that becomes known as the Shema. And in the Shema, it's actually all about legacy and how do we hand down what God has done to other people. And I think the Shema has 3 really basic challenges for us as we make sure what God has done in our relationships doesn't end with just our relationships, making sure it spreads along and then we leave a legacy. So in Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9, again, it's called the Shema. It says this: "Listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. And you must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands that I'm giving you today. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you're on the road, when you're going to bed and when you're getting up. Tie them to your hands and wear them on your forehead as reminders. Write them on your doorpost, or write them on the doorpost of your house and onto your gates." See, inside of this prayer that actually became a daily moment of reflection to a lot of the Israelites in that era, in the side of this prayer is a reminder that there are 3 ways we can be completely in control of the way our relationships leave a legacy. We can guide what they're saying. The first one we saw right off the bat is the first challenge is in your relationships. You need to make sure that your relationships are loving your God. Make sure that your relationships are placing God first. It was right off the top in that prayer that we read. Again, it said, "Listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. Commit yourselves wholeheartedly to the commands that you're hearing today." The very first thing when these Israelites would pray to their God and remind themselves of how great he is to put him in first place. Your relationship should be doing the same thing. You should be finding a way to put God in first place. In your friendships, in your romantic relationships, in your coworker relationships, God takes first place. And this isn't just a command that was said back then to the Israelites. See, because hundreds of years later, Jesus actually renewed this and made sure that it was part of the new covenant, the new era that's represented in the New Testament. See, in Mark 12, Jesus is in a debate with a bunch of religious teachers of that day. And let's just pick it up in the middle and see what he says. One of the teachers of religious law was standing there listening to the debate. He realized that Jesus had answered all the questions well. So he asked, "Of all the commandments, which is the most important?" And Jesus replied, check it, "The most important commandment is this: Listen, O Israel, the Lord our God is the one and only Lord. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength." Jesus repeats the priority that everything that we live in life needs to love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. That means the way that you feel should honor God. Your emotions, the way that you physically treat that other person, interact with them, should honor God emotionally or physically. You know, your mind, your soul, your strength, all these things should honor God in the way that you relate to the people around you. And in doing so, your relationship will inspire the people around it to also learn to love God. But Jesus wasn't done there. He actually rolled one more command out of this, one more massive commandment. He said this: the second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandments is greater than these. In Matthew's recording of this challenging moment, he actually said this. He adds on that Jesus said, "All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commands." Everything the Bible says about relationships and about life hangs on these 2 commands. Honor God, and then take that honor to people around you. Love God, and then take that love to the people around you. Our relationships first need to love God, and then we can take that love to other people. Now, let's just be honest for a second. Some of you came in this morning on accident. Not sure how it happened. I'd love to find out. But a lot of you actually are new on your faith journey. So this idea that a relationship can love God or not might seem so foreign to you. Or conversely, maybe you were born in a religious family and they've just been leading the way and you've been riding the stream. Right? So for some of you, this is hard to even imagine. that you're in control of your relationships loving God, but the truth is you completely are. You can point your relationships to the love of God. To help you do that, I think this question is actually really helpful. You can look at any relationship in your life and you can actually ask, does this relationship honor God and honor others? Is this relationship putting God first, or is it putting me first? Is it putting money first? Is it putting emotion first? And is that relationship honoring the people around it? Right? Let's be honest, a lot of us get stuck in this idea, and we think that a relationship honoring God means praying together every morning and reading the Bible and attending small group and serving and being in the church, and all those things are fantastic. They're all goals to strive to. But if you're at the beginning of your journey, those might as well be speaking French. But do you realize that the Apostle Paul, he had a read on us from way back then? Because in Galatians 6:2, he actually put it this way. He said, carry each other's burdens, and in this way, you will fulfill the law of Christ. If those idyllic, future-minded versions of a life lived, a relationship lived with a loving God seem too far out there, well, here's the good news. Every time you bear one another's burdens, you're actually fulfilling the law of Christ, of loving God and loving others. See, every time that you reach out and you're a safe place for someone to heal, you're honoring God, you're honoring others. When you give somebody a chance to sit with you when they're in pain, when you celebrate someone's highs, when you pick up the slack when they're in a struggling season, all these things actually honor God, and they love people. But this question that we're asking, does this relationship honor God and honor others? Honestly, it's a little dangerous. Because you're going to find some answers of some people you have years with that the relationship is not honoring God and not loving others. So in my first church, my best friend in the world there was our worship pastor, actually. I was the campus pastor, he was the worship pastor. We were a fantastic team. He and his wife were the very first adopted aunt and uncles that my daughter had. Right? So we were so close, and you would have thought on the surface level that two pastors being best friends definitely loved God and love other people. No, you're super wrong. Here's what happened. We worked together and we were so just straight up toxic. And maybe you have friendships that are like this, that no matter what happens, it's always wrong. Right? We would get off after a fantastic weekend and instantly be mad. We actually got into this habit of going to a meeting and then having a secret meeting after the meeting to complain about the meeting. Right? And then if somebody invited themselves to that meeting, we just had a meeting after that meeting to complain about the person that just walked in. Right? We actually had complaining restaurants. We always complained at Chipotle. I don't know why it happened that way, but it's true. And after enough time, we created such a toxic environment around us that did not love God, did not love others, that honestly, years later, we're both honest about it, it took God forever to heal us of that. And what hurts me the most, I can hurt myself all day, but it took the church a couple of years to get over the toxic thing we accidentally created. See, if I would have had this question in my back pocket, we might have gone to Chipotle just for the chips rather than to complain. And if you ask this question, does this relationship love God and love others, you got to be ready for the challenge that it might not. And then you have to make sure that you personally are putting God first so that the relationship can follow you in that moment. The second challenge we actually see in the Shema is this challenge to lead your people. That your relationship can lead people, actually. It says this in Deuteronomy 6:7, repeat these promises, repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you're on the road, when you're going to bed and when you're getting up. See, this repetitive motion of talking about these promises and reminding ourselves of them, reminding our family of them, reminding our relationships of them. It's our way of leading our people. And honestly, some people, like when you hear leadership, you're like, that's not my thing. I'm not a leader. I'm not interested in that. Can I challenge you for a second? Because leadership has very little to do with title. It has very little to do with given authority. Leadership has to do with influence and relationship. So for the purpose of this challenge, I want to define leading is this way. I want to define leading as consistently guiding people to God's destination. That's it. That's all it takes to be a leader in your relationship and for your relationship to lead other people, is to consistently point them in God's direction. Consistently repeating them over and over again, just like the Shema said. And you don't have to bear the brunt of finding the vision and finding the future. You just have to point them to what God is already doing. and point them to your story of what God has already done. Proverbs 22:6, it actually puts it this way. It says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not turn from it. Now, granted, this is talking pretty explicitly about parent-child relationships, which a lot of us have. But I think the same principle rolls out to the people around us. Because the Hebrew word for train there is actually this word tanach. And tanach means to intentionally equip and start, to begin the journey. And what Proverbs 22:6 doesn't do is give us a destination. It just says begin the relationship, begin training your child, equip them, be intentional, begin leading your relationships toward God. Just consistently point them in his direction and then watch what he does. This week, as I got ready for this message, I thought of all the people that I actually get to lead, all the relationships I get to lead out from, and I get to make sure my relationships are changing the world around us. Right? So I get to lead at home with my wife and sometimes with our kids when they listen. Right? I get to lead here at church, at work, with the people that report to me, and actually even some of the staff that don't report to me. And when I get real brave, maybe I even try to lead the people that are my bosses. Right? I actually get a chance to actually influence them. I get to influence the volunteer team that does Lakeland students. I get to influence my friends. I get to influence my family. And see, all of those relationships are dominoes that actually change the world around them also. Honestly, what happens is you begin to step into this leadership role of consistently pointing your relationships towards God, and as your relationship then starts to lead people towards God, you're going to find that you were naturally wired and gifted with a leadership style. And your relationships will naturally become known as something that's leading the way. See, in my relationships, I decided a long time ago that I was going to have one unique trait. I was always going to say the thing that needed to be said. Right? I've become perfectly comfortable in the uncomfortable, and it starts from the dumbest of reasons, guys. See, 12 years ago when I got married, my wife and I wanted nothing more than, 13 years ago. I don't know why I do math up here. It never works. 13 years ago when I got married, my wife and I, we wanted nothing more than to go to Disney World on our honeymoon. If you know us, that's not a shock. But we were convinced we had no money to do it. And nobody in our family was brave enough to say, how much money do you have? They all just went, yep, that sucks, and closed the conversation down. Right, so we decided instead to honeymoon in the completely first world metropolitan area of Schaumburg, Illinois. Stop. Guys, they have a Best Buy and a mall and medieval times, and I grew up in a cornfield. So this was very exciting, right? It's also weird now that I live an hour from the hotel. Anyway, so what happened was about a year later, we actually started looking at a Disney trip for the two of us. And we were shocked to find out that we spent more money in Schaumburg than we would have at Disney World. Because we just said yes to everything, all the Best Buy stuff. Right? We almost brought home a TV from our honeymoon. Anyway, I decided then that I was always going to say the hard thing that needed to be said in the relationships I have. And the relationships I have actually inspired the people around us to say hard things. See, my daughter, who's 10, is perfectly comfortable with hard questions and hard conversations. She asks us hard questions, her dance teachers, her school teachers, her brother, which is interesting because he's nonverbal, so that's a fun conversation. But over this time, I've also watched my friends become more comfortable with asking hard questions because my wife and I do. I've watched other marriages pick up how to have hard conversations because we've worked on it. Do you see that you are perfectly equipped to lead your relationships and lead your people? To take the front step of pointing them towards God. Now, leading your people for you may not look like saying the hard thing, because that's really weird, honestly. It may look like asking people how you can pray for them. It may look like having conversations about God while you're at work. It may look like taking someone and inviting them to your house on Friday night instead of letting them go to the bar again. It may look like having time for God even when everybody else is telling you you're busy. See, all these things of consistently pointing our people towards God's destination, they are leading your people. And as your relationships do that, you may find that your relationships are leading the way. A question you can ask to help with this is really this: God, where do you want this relationship to head, and how can we help it get there? What do you want this relationship to be known for, and how can we help it get there? When you pray this, you may be shocked at the simple answers that come. God may want your relationship to lead the way in honesty to all the people around it. And if that's true, you need to start leading your way towards the truth. God may want your relationship to set the standard of freedom to the people around it. And if that's true, you need to start leading your way towards healing. God may answer that he wants your relationship to set the standard of care and support to the people around it. At which point you need to lead that relationship towards help and service. You see how easy it is? God, what do you want this relationship to be known for? And how can we both help it get there? The third challenge we actually see in Deuteronomy and the Shema is this. It's not just love your God, it's not just lead your people, it's also live your faith. Live your faith out loud. Let your relationships live its faith out loud. Set the standard in being a vocal and active faith around us. Deuteronomy 6:8-9, talking about those promises again, it says, tie them to your hands and wear them on your forehead as reminders. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. You know what all those things are? They're all public declarations of a private faith. Wearing something is a public declaration. Writing something on your house is weird, but it's a public declaration. You know this because everybody just finished cleaning up Christmas decorations, and I wildly underperformed my neighborhood. So I was very glad when I took those things down to not be saying anymore, I'm too busy for Christmas. Right? The same thing is true in your relationships. As you wear your faith out loud, as you live it out loud, as you write it on your house, as you wear it on your forehead and your hand, as you put it out in public, it will actually start to lead the way, and your relationships will lead the way as you live your faith out loud. See, we believe following Jesus changes everything. He gives purpose to the hard times, gives joy to the joyless, a voice to the voiceless. And all of that is right in our fingerprints when we have a relationship with Jesus. And yet we take all that and we get real quiet real fast when we leave these doors. See, somewhere along the way, we developed faith relationships and then others, right? Somewhere along the way, we developed people we're fine talking about Jesus with and people we're not fine talking about Jesus with. I think that's really interesting because we don't see that anywhere in Scripture. As a matter of fact, I think it's a defense mechanism. You know why? Because I have it, right? Sometimes I'm so slow and reluctant to bring up that I'm a pastor. And honestly, I love being a pastor. I'm not embarrassed of it, or you, okay? But here's what happens. Every time I bring up I'm a pastor, everybody around me gets real awkward real quick. It's like they start remembering, like, okay, did I curse? Did I say something bad? Is Jason going to start, did he have a Bible hidden somewhere? Is he going to throw it at me? Like, you can see the lady at Great Clip. She's doing all this calculus while she cuts my hair, and I just want her focused on the one thing. Okay, so, but here's what happens. I sit there, and I have a faith that I love, and I push it down, and I pray, and I say, God, let me know when you want me to say it. Let me know. Just, I'm gonna wait. And I think in my head, and I think this is a common struggle, I think in our heads, we sit there and we imagine that God is going, okay, wait, now, go. Like those army men in Toy Story, we think he's just like waiting, ready to say go. What would happen if all the key relationships represented in this room, what if we all just started realizing that the answer is very rarely wait, and it's almost always go? What if we just started living our faith out loud, living so radically and so differently that the world that can't help but notice? Actually, it's in Hebrews 12. The author of Hebrews says, see to it that no one misses the grace of God. See to it that nobody misses the grace of God. And your relationships should do the same service. Your key relationships, your key friendships should live your faith out loud in such a way that no one could possibly miss the grace of God because they saw it on your life. And they saw it on your relationships. James, the half-brother of Jesus, in his letter in the New Testament, he put it this way. He said, what good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone? So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it is dead and useless. Now, someone may argue, some people have faith, others have good deeds, but I say, how can you show me your faith if you don't have good deeds? Instead, I will show you my faith by my good deeds. What if your relationships became so active that nobody missed the grace of God because your faith was lived out through good deeds and everyone saw the difference? Everyone saw the difference in your marriage and your coworkers and your friendships and your sibling relationships, and they were so radically different that people leaned in and said, how do I get even a little bit of that? So the challenge to love God, lead people, and live faith, it's all the ingredients to a legacy that will far outstrip one that you could build on accident. See, a couple of years ago, there was an American teacher named A.E. Winship, which is like the most teacher name I've ever heard in my life. A.E. Winship. He was either that or a research doctor. Those were the only two options from his birth. But A.E. Winship sat out and he decided he wanted to research and study the impact of a legacy left on purpose. So he researched and he found two different men that lived in America at the exact same time. And he studied how different their lives were and how different the legacy was that was left around those people. See, one was a guy named John Edwards. Watch this trick. John Edwards looked a lot like this. No, almost. We were close. He looked like this. Some of you guys know John Edwards. He was a Puritan pastor. You were forced to read some of his stuff in junior year of high school if you were like me in the cornfield. But what he did was he went around, he planted churches, he led revivals, he was a pastor, he wrote books, he did all this stuff, right? But then when he came home, he was very intentional about loving God, leading his people, and living his faith out loud. We know this because his wife was one wife, his kids were respected of him, and then just imagine the domino that fell from those relationships out to the relationships around him. Because he came home and he invested in the one, the two, and the we. And at the end of 150 years, that investment in the one, two, and we, well, let's just track how that played out. Because over the next 150 years, Jonathan Edwards' family legacy includes one U.S. vice president, one dean of a law school, dean of a medical school, 3 U.S. senators, 3 governors, 3 mayors, 13 college presidents, 30 judges, 60 doctors, 65 professors, 75 military officers, 80 public officials, 100 lawyers, 100 pastors, and 285 college graduates. Whew, I'm lightheaded. Not really, it's okay, don't start praying for me. Okay, here's what's interesting to me. That type of legacy does not happen on accident. Nobody pretends that type of legacy happens on accident. That happened because John Edwards was intentional in where he put his investments in the relationships around him. Now, at the same time that John Edwards was living his life, there's another guy in New York named Max Jukes. And Max Jukes looked a lot like this. He was known for one thing. He got arrested a lot. He was arrested all the time for selling drugs and addict and public intoxication. He got fired from multiple jobs. He had multiple families spread throughout the New York area, which is crazy, right? And here's what happened. He clearly, as far as we know, did not love God, did not lead his people, and did not live a faith out loud. Over the next 150 years, the exact same 150 years that John Edwards' family was living, Max Jukes' family was also living. Look at the legacy he left behind. In Max Jukes' descendants, over 150 years, it included 7 murderers, 60 thieves, 190 prostitutes, 150 convicts, 310 paupers, 440 known addicts. Of the 1,200 descendants that were studied, 300 of them died prematurely. It almost takes your breath away how much of a difference it makes when we're intentional about our relationships and our legacy. When we love God, lead people, and live our faith. The contrast couldn't be any more obvious. Now, I don't know where you came from. I don't know if your family was known more for family devos at the table or empty bottles in the corner. I don't know if your family was known more for being there for each other or for your dad walking out 20 years ago. I don't know. But here's what I do know. Every single Max Jukes legacy is only one Jesus moment away from being a John Edwards family legacy. Everything you walked in with, all the garbage that you accumulate, all the struggle that you live under and under that pressure, it's only one moment away from not impacting the relationships around you. And that moment is found at the cross in a relationship with Jesus. Now here's what's interesting. From the stage before, I've shared that my family and I, my wife and I, we don't come from, we're not Max Jukes bad, but we're like squarely in the middle. We don't have the best legacy that we lived up to. So from the very beginning of our marriage, we set out to start a new breed of Etchison. We wanted to live a different life than the families and the legacies that were given to us. And I've shared that before, but do you want to know the X factor, the interesting thing? We don't sit in our living room and come up with that vision. We don't sit there in silence and be like, that's good. Here's what God said to me. Sometimes we do, but not always. Because for some of you, this is the first time to even consider that God has a plan and a dream for your relationships. That God has a vision for your friendships. That God has a vision for your sibling relationships, your romantic relationships, your work relationships. That God cares about them so much that he has a plan and a dream for them. And he's put you in this place during this series to become the change agent of the people around you. And my wife and I, as we sit back, as we define this new generation of our family, you know what we've done? We've watched and been influenced by the relationships around us for 13 years. We've said, did you see how that kid turned out? I want a little bit of that parenting. Let's do some of that. Did you see how that marriage looks? Oh, I want a little bit of that marriage. Let's bring that in and learn from them. Do you see how those friendships work? Oh my goodness, if we had friends like that, our lives would be incredible. Let's bring some of those friendship styles in. You want to know what none of those people knew? That their relationships were speaking to Ashton and I. And that their relationships and the way they lived them has radically changed our entire lives and given my kids a brand new starting point that I didn't have. The same exact thing can be true for you, which also means the same pressure belongs to us to leave a legacy on purpose and to watch our relationships flow from it. Would you guys pray with me? God, I pray that this morning, this idea that may seem so simple on the surface, God, I pray that it is deep and it is reaching, Lord. I pray that the pain we came in with from our relationships, it has no power over us anymore because we can turn it over to you. That we can enter into a relationship with you and watch our faith and our leadership and our love of you just grow. God, I pray that every relationship in this room would be touched in your power and in your name right now. God, and that we would look around and we would start to see the fruits of a legacy that are lived for you, God. God, today I pray you would give us clarity on what you want the most important relationships in our life to say. Show us what they are saying to the people around us, and show us what you would have them say instead. And God, I pray against any excuses, any insecurity, any fear, or any pain. I pray those things would not stand in your way. That instead you would transform the one, you would give grace and freedom in the we, or in the two, so we can impact the we. God, be with us this week. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, on your way out, if you have relational stuff and you need help unburdening it, our prayer team is going to be up here, and make sure that you come back next week to hear the very first rollout of Build. We'll see you then.